This is the last signal radio. If you can hear me, that alone means your world is still intact. Or at least, more intact than mine. I'm keeping my voice steady, though I don't know how long I can pretend this is normal. Because tonight, I'm broadcasting into a world that is losing something so basic, so fundamental, that none of us ever imagined it could disappear. Sound. Not noise, not voices, not music. Sound itself. The world is going quiet in ways that don't make sense, in ways that feel like reality itself is thinning around the edges. And I am here, holding on to this microphone like it's the last lifeline to sanity. It started subtly, quietly. Maybe that's the cruel irony. The first thing I noticed was a bird outside the station window. It hopped onto the antenna rail, tilted its little head upward, opened its beak, and nothing. No chirp, no flutter, not even the faint rasp of breath. I thought it was me. I thought I was tired or something was wrong with my ears. But then the car that always drives past the station at dusk, the old one with the rattling engine and the awful belt squeal, rolled by in complete silence. The headlights glided across the wall like ghosts. The driver didn't seem to notice. Maybe he had music on. Maybe he just didn't realize the world wasn't responding to him anymore. Then people started calling the station. First, someone from a nearby town said they couldn't hear their own voice clearly, like their words were dissolving before reaching their own ears. Another caller said their dog wouldn't bark anymore, not because it was sick or scared, but because the sound simply didn't appear. A mother said she screamed for her child to come inside, but her own voice died somewhere between her throat and the air. Still, I thought, faulty lines, maybe a prank, maybe a power fluctuation messing with audio. But denial only works until reality forces your face against the truth. That moment came less than an hour ago. I stepped outside to check the backup generator because the station lights were flickering again. I slammed the metal door behind me. Or, I tried to. My hand moved. The door moved. I felt the vibration in my arm. But there was no slam. The door closed in total, suffocating silence. It felt like someone had stolen the world's reaction to my action. A door should slam. Sound should follow. That's how reality works. But the world didn't answer back. When the wind picks up, it should whistle. But it didn't. The breeze moved the trees, but no rustling, no shaking branches, no leaves crunching under my boots. Only the sensation. Only the movement. I stood there, holding my breath, trying to hear anything at all. And it hit me. The silence wasn't an absence. It was a presence. Heavy. Pressing. It wasn't the world going quiet. It was the world being muted. I came back inside, and the phone lines were exploding with calls. Some faint, some distorted, sounding like voices dragged underwater. A truck driver said his engine died while still running, because the hum vanished mid-sentence. A man from across the state said his wife tried to call for help, but her voice crumbled before leaving her lips. A group of hikers told me they saw an entire forest still. Animals running into rocks, trees, each other, because they couldn't hear their own footfalls. And then, the first impossible report. An emergency responder from a military base, his voice shaking so badly I could barely understand, described a jet that had gone off course. The towers lost communication, not because of signal issues, but because no sound transmitted. The pilot tried to radio in. Nothing came through. Not static, not garble, nothing. The plane descended, silently, its engines still spinning. Nobody on the ground heard it until it hit the runway. And even then, even the impact was muffled. A catastrophe that should have shaken the earth sounded like a soft exhale. Now, I'm sitting here watching the hallway outside the booth. The lights sway from the old wiring, normally buzzing loud enough to annoy anyone working late. But there's no buzz, no hum, nothing. Even the clock on the wall, its second-hand clicks. I see it moving, but I can't hear it. And I know clocks don't just turn themselves off like that. People are scared. You're scared. I'm scared. But I need to stay steady, because someone has to be the voice in this empty air. Someone has to talk while talking is still possible. I've been monitoring reports coming in from the outskirts of the county. Whole neighborhoods have gone silent. Not quiet. Silent. A man reported he tried clanging pots and pans together. They hit each other, but no clang, no ring, no echo. Like the air swallowed it whole. Someone else said their motorcycle revs fine, but the sound doesn't leave the engine, as if it's trapped inside. And the worst part, the silence is spreading. No one knows why, no one knows how. It's not a blackout. It's not atmospheric pressure. It's not an attack. Sound doesn't just disappear. It doesn't melt. It doesn't get absorbed unless something is absorbing it. Right now I'm talking into the microphone, and I don't even know if the words I'm hearing in my own head are the same ones reaching you. My headphones are silent. I'm speaking into nothing, and praying that the broadcast is still carrying my voice through whatever is left of audible reality. Some callers have said the silence feels like a weight on the chest, like the world is pressing inward, like the air has thickened into something dense. Something is wrong. One caller said they could hear a faint sound, like a whisper, right before the silence swallowed everything. Another said the silence had edges, borders, places where sound cuts off mid-echo. If you're listening now, watch your surroundings. Pay attention to what you're not hearing. If footsteps fade, if your voice sounds distant, if objects lose their impact, you might be near the edge. And I'm afraid to say it, but I have to. Once the world falls quiet, nothing comes back. The world that is unraveling 1 decibel at a time. If you're hearing me, hold on to that. Grip the sound of my voice like a lifeline, because beyond the fringe of your town, or your neighborhood, or maybe right outside your window, the silence is waiting. And tonight, I went to see it. Not by choice. Curiosity and fear sometimes drag us toward the very thing we should run from. I didn't plan to leave the station, but the calls, they kept coming in, reporting that the silent zone's border was moving faster than anyone expected. Reports said it swallowed 3 towns in under an hour. Some people said they could see birds dropping from the sky, wings beating frantically, but making no sound. Others said cars drifted across lanes because drivers couldn't hear their own engines anymore, couldn't tell if the vehicles were accelerating or dying. A paramedic said she tried to scream for help when her partner collapsed, but her voice vanished somewhere between her throat and the air. It wasn't fear. It was erased. So I packed a recorder, a manual radio unit, and a flashlight. Not because I thought any of them would help, but because holding something, anything, makes you feel less helpless. I stepped outside the station, locked the door, again hearing nothing but feeling the dead weight of silence pressing against my ears, and started walking toward the outskirts. Power lines stretched overhead, vibrating faintly with wind I could feel, but not hear. My own boots hit the pavement, but the impacts were silent. I kept glancing down, half expecting to see my footsteps not matching the ground, like a bad dream where your body stops belonging to physics. The first sign that I was getting close was the air. It felt thicker, like humidity before a storm, but cooler, heavier. I breathed in and felt resistance, as though the air itself didn't want to enter my lungs. I could still hear a few faint sounds behind me. The low hum of an old AC unit on the station roof. The rustle of my sleeve against my jacket. Thin, fragile noises that flickered like dying candle flames. Then I took one more step. The hum disappeared. The rustle vanished. The world cut out like someone sliced the air with a razor. I froze. Not because I wanted to, but because my brain didn't know how to comprehend just losing sound so abruptly. There was no fade out, no gradual muffle. It was a wall, a boundary, a place where the rules changed. The flashlight in my hand vibrated slightly when I tapped it. I felt the vibration in my skin, but no click, no rattle, no mechanical hum. My heartbeat pulsed in my chest, but even that was muted. If sound was a thread tying your mind to your body, that thread was severed at the border. Ahead of me, the world looked the same. But it wasn't. Leaves moved. Branches swayed. A stray piece of paper rolled across the road. All of it in perfect, suffocating silence. Even my own breathing was gone. I opened my mouth, trying to speak, not expecting any answer. And I was right. My voice didn't just sound distant. It didn't exist. I turned back toward the station, 2 steps away, and I heard again. Not fully, but enough. The faint hum of power lines, the soft buzz of electricity. I stepped forward. Gone. I stepped back, there. A line, invisible and merciless, marked the border between 2 realities. This wasn't nature. This wasn't physics. This was my intention. And standing there, body half in sound, half in nothingness, I realized something that chilled me deeper than the silence itself. It was expanding, actively, purposefully. The border had moved again while I stood there. A mailbox that had been behind the line minutes earlier was now completely swallowed in the silence. I watched as a squirrel ran along the road and crossed the boundary. Its claws tapped the pavement. I could see the tiny impacts, but no sound accompanied them. It stopped, confused, trembling, spinning in circles as though the world had suddenly betrayed it. Then it bolted, straight into a fence it couldn't hear. The impact made no sound. The creature fell still, twitching. Whether it lived or died, I couldn't tell. The silence stole even the meaning of motion. But the worst moment? The one that nearly sent me running back before I lost my nerve? A figure emerged from deeper within the silent zone. A man, middle-aged, wearing a jacket, maybe from a nearby neighborhood swallowed earlier. He stumbled in uneven steps like he was drunk or injured. I waved, but he didn't react. He kept moving until he crossed into the boundary of sound again, just a few feet from me. That's when I heard him. A gasp. A sob. Small. Broken. A whisper of sound reached me like it had been trapped inside his body, suddenly released. But he didn't look at me. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, staring past me, through me. His lips moved. No voice came out. Even though he stood in my half of the border, where sound should have returned, his voice was still gone. He grabbed my arm. His hand shook violently. He mouthed something. A single word. I watched his lips shape it. Run. Then, before I could react, he stepped backward, back into the silent zone. And he was swallowed. Visually he remained, but the world devoured every sound he should have made. The shuffle of his feet, the ragged breathing, the panicked heartbeat I could see in his neck. He disappeared around a corner, and I never saw him again. I stumbled back to the station, not sure whether I was walking or floating. The moment I shut the door behind me, again, no slam, I collapsed into this chair and turned on the broadcast. I keep replaying that moment in my head. The word he mouthed, the terror in his eyes, the silence eating the world around him, and the fact that even after stepping into sound again, his voice didn't return. Whatever this phenomenon is, it doesn't just remove sound from the air. It takes it from you. It changes you. And the border is coming closer. Faster than even the emergency channels predicted. If you're in a place where you can still hear anything, birds, cars, your own heartbeat, stay there. Don't approach the edge. Don't test it. Don't cross it. The silence is not passive. It is not a void. It is an advancing force. And it is hunting. The silence is no longer distant. It has swallowed entire towns, entire neighborhoods. The lines of contact we relied on, the sounds that let us know we were alive and together, are gone. Emergency systems collapse under the weight of nothing. Sirens, alarms, radios, even shouting, all absorbed, all erased. People stumble through streets, their own movements deafened. A man runs into a lamppost, swinging his arms to gauge space, but the world gives him no feedback, no thud, no echo, just emptiness. Planes fall from the sky. They spin, engines roaring silently, metal screeching against metal, passengers screaming inside cabins that produce no sound. The first reports came from satellites. 2 jets that should have been transmitting coordinates and chatter vanished from communication logs hours before they crashed. Ground control only saw them as blinking dots that disappeared mid-flight. The horror isn't only the destruction, it's the absence. Nobody heard them fall. The impact left no sonic mark. The world registered nothing. Animals are panicking. Pets flee homes, knocking into walls, claws skidding on floors that give no response. Birds flap through streets, their wings moving like sheets of fabric in windless air. Wild animals encroach on human spaces, disoriented and aggressive, driven mad by the silence. Reports come in of entire herds of deer colliding mid-gallop, of birds smashing into glass facades. Even the smallest creatures seem unable to process the missing sound, and their chaos amplifies the terror for the humans who can still hear. People speak, but their words evaporate before leaving their mouths. I've seen families huddle in doorways, mouthing frantic instructions with faces twisted in disbelief. Their children cry, but only the tight movements of their throats betray it. The physical motions of distress exist without the sonic confirmation. It is impossible to convey the scale of panic to someone on the other side of a silent line. If you can still hear me, consider yourself lucky. Vehicles move blindly, colliding with one another, braking too late or not at all. The streets are a ballet of chaos in a world that cannot announce it. Emergency responders are crippled. They can't hear their own engines, horns, or radios. Navigation becomes instinct alone. Without auditory cues, coordination collapses. Survivors report that they rely on sight, vibrations underfoot, and the faintest traces of movement in the air, yet it is never enough. Some callers speak in whispers, their voices cracking with terror and disbelief. A firefighter from the northern edge of the zone described a fire that spread through a residential block without anyone hearing it ignite. Flames ate through timber and furniture in perfect silence, leaving ash and ruin as the only proof of the inferno. Another caller from the south described hearing faint vibrations in metal fences. Subtle, irregular, but the only signal that something moved nearby. He insisted that the vibrations were warning him, guiding him, though he could not see the source. Planes, cars, fires, animals, people. The collapse isn't fragmented, it's systematic. And as I gather reports from all directions, a pattern emerges. The silence moves in waves, like a tide, approaching from multiple fronts simultaneously. There is no randomness in what it consumes first. Neighborhoods, fields, towns vanish in similar sequences. People describe a pressure at the edges, a weight that precedes the disappearance of sound. One caller compared it to a hand pressing down on your chest, yet invisible, inescapable, inevitable. Some have attempted to resist. Horns blare, loudspeakers shout, radios transmit at maximum volume. Nothing breaks through. The silence simply absorbs the energy, leaving the devices intact but mute. One man reported setting off fireworks in a small town to see if sound could survive the edge. Bright streaks of fire and sparks arced across the night, yet not a single bang, crackle, or whistle escaped. Observers could see the smoke curl in the sky, but no sound followed. And yet, within the void, subtle anomalies appear. Some describe hearing almost imperceptible vibrations in walls, floors, and windows. A few faintly sensed a rhythm, almost like a heartbeat, but one that was not their own. It is enough to make the impossible feel deliberate. The silence isn't simply empty. It seems aware, attentive, observing human attempts to communicate, adapting, learning. I watch a reporter's live feed from the edge of the collapsing city. A helicopter hovers, engines spinning, but the whirring blades produce no sound. Streets below are littered with people and animals alike, frozen mid-action, some blindly stepping into hazards. The image is surreal, almost dreamlike, but the terror is real. The camera captures the world moving, yet entirely without voice. You could almost believe the earth itself had gone deaf, watching life continue in a mute, disjointed pantomime. Some survivors describe faint whispers at the very fringe of perception. Not intelligible words, just vibrations that mimic speech, teasing, taunting, or maybe guiding. It is enough to make you question your senses. The human brain, deprived of its primary mode of interpreting the world, struggles. Panic intensifies. People become fragile, not because of immediate danger, but because they cannot process the absence of sound. The world itself has become a cognitive trap, a labyrinth of emptiness that threatens to unhinge perception completely. A few lucky pockets remain where sound persists. A faucet dripping, a generator humming, a phone vibrating. But even these are fleeting. The collapse is relentless, moving faster than anyone can predict. Patterns suggest intelligence behind its spread. Nothing feels random anymore. Cities, rural towns, neighborhoods. They vanish according to rules no one yet understands. And for those still able to hear even a fragment, the awareness of what is coming is terrifying. You cannot fight it, you cannot warn others, and you cannot outrun it. Planes crash silently. Fires rage in muted terror. Animals thrash and collide, and humans stumble through a world stripped of the most basic truths. That voices carry, that motion makes sound, that sound confirms reality. The silence is a predator, and all that remains are eyes, hands, and feet navigating an invisible trap. And somewhere beyond the edge, the silence waits, structured, deliberate, moving with intent. The lines keep ringing, but it's not normal. They vibrate faintly, as if the world itself is hesitating before allowing sound to travel. Some voices break through, distorted, stretched, fading in and out like fragments of glass. A woman from the northern outskirts called in just moments ago, her words barely holding together. It's heavier, like the air itself is pressing down. My voice, it disappears. I can hear her, barely, the syllables fractured as though carried through water. Every caller tells the same thing in their own way. Sound is failing, dying, evaporating. Not gone in some abstract sense, but devoured, absorbed before it reaches another ear. A man on the line from a rural county whispers about his livestock. They don't make a sound. Cows, chickens, nothing. I hear only movement. He pauses, fear evident even through the fragile remnants of his voice. And they panic. They crash into each other. Another caller interrupts, a boy whose trembling tone makes me ache. Mom, I can't hear her scream. The gap between his words is deafening. I have to listen hard to catch the fragments, to parse meaning from what remains. They describe the silence as a physical weight. One caller, a teacher, explains how standing outside feels like gravity multiplied. My chest, my head, the air, it's pressing in like something is squeezing us, but invisible. Another, a hiker trapped near the forest's edge, says he can feel a boundary on his skin, like a membrane cutting off sound before it reaches him. Every report confirms it. The silence isn't just absence, it has presence. It's a force. I keep asking callers to describe the edge. They tell me it looks the same as the world behind it, but the moment you cross, the familiar becomes alien. Footsteps die mid-stride. Voices vanish mid-phrase. Even sounds trapped in objects are erased. Engines running, doors slamming, phones ringing. They all become nothing. A farmer reports turning on a generator. He sees the blades spin, feels the vibration, but hears nothing. The line wavers. It's watching, waiting, it knows we... His voice cuts, leaving a silence on my end that makes me shiver. Animals react unpredictably. Callers report dogs standing rigid, ears tilted, staring at nothing. Birds flutter and crash into walls. Insects collide mid-air. A delivery driver describes a deer leaping across the road, then vanishing into soundless air. It's as though the silence doesn't just remove sound. It scrambles instinct, disrupts the very sense of presence. The world becomes a surreal nightmare, where motion exists without consequence and perception fails. Some callers describe faint sounds just beyond comprehension. Whispers, patterns of vibration that feel like communication, though their meaning is impossible to grasp. They tease, taunt, hint at guidance or threats. A scientist who managed to call from a lab near the affected zone said she could detect irregular pulses in metal structures, faint oscillations invisible to the ear, but somehow felt. The pulses repeat in patterns, not random, and she insisted that the silence seems to respond to human attempts at communication. Every horn, every shout, every alarm seems to provoke adaptation. The phenomenon isn't passive, it's learning. Even familiar signals betray us. Phones vibrate silently. Television screens flicker with images of the collapsing world, but the audio fails. Radio stations broadcast empty waves, transmitting nothing but visual static to screens and meters. People are terrified not only of the silence itself, but of the absence of feedback, the impossibility of confirming reality. The brain struggles to process it. If a screen produces no sound, does it exist? If a car crashes silently, is it happening? These questions haunt the callers as they try to survive, to make sense of a world that no longer obeys its own laws. One of the most chilling calls came from a mother hiding in her kitchen. Her words quavered, but the fragments reached me. I can hear faint voices in the dark, whispering, guiding, or taunting. Her sentence cut into static. The whispering she describes isn't intelligible, but it follows a pattern. It adapts, responds. I've received dozens of reports of similar experiences, an almost sentient quality in the silence, vibrating faintly, shaping itself around human perception, hinting at intent, presence, intelligence. Some callers have begun describing the edges of this zone with a vocabulary that doesn't exist. They talk about gradients of sound, zones where some frequencies survive longer than others, faint hums that resist disappearance, and the terrifying realization that once you step past these thresholds, you might never return to audible reality. The silence carries structure, and structure implies design, maybe intelligence. Every fragmented call, every faint syllable, every distorted report builds the same pattern. Sound is no longer a constant. It is a battlefield, and we are losing. Despite the terror, people cling to communication. Each call, each fragmented whisper, is a lifeline. I try to guide them, move where sound persists, avoid zones that are swallowing voices, note the subtle vibrations in walls and objects. Observation becomes more important than speech. Intuition replaces instructions. Gestures, vibrations, and patterns in the environment are now tools of survival. Survival depends on noticing what is not there, on reading the world without relying on the most fundamental sense we have relied upon since birth. One caller described what they called echo shadows, the faintest reverberations of sound from moments ago, disappearing after seconds. They tried to follow the echoes to find safe passages, but the patterns were inconsistent. The echoes devoured faster than they could move. Another described an entire bridge over a river, steps crossing it without a sound, until a gust of wind lifted leaves and the sudden absence of any echo made them freeze. Survival, they realize, is an exercise in constant vigilance, anticipation, and fear. And in between these fragmented voices, one truth is emerging. The silence is not random. It spreads systematically. It adapts to human action. It carries intention. Humans are no longer navigating a passive world. They are navigating an active predator, a force that erases the most basic conformations of existence. The calls end or fade, as if swallowed before completion, and I am left holding the receiver, listening to the weight of absence pressing against me, knowing that the silence is already moving closer, learning, shaping the world. Every fragment of human sound that reaches me is both a lifeline and a warning. It is almost too late. Reports continue to flood in, but now there's a new element, a thread of hope or terror, depending on how you look at it. The acoustician, a specialist in the science of sound, has been monitoring the patterns forming in the silent zones. She's quiet on the line, measured, almost clinical, but what she reports chills me deeper than any vanishing echo. According to her, the silence is not random. It's structured. It moves in waves, layers, pulses, like the world itself has been overlaid with a new set of rules. The way it spreads, the way it swallows sound first from one neighborhood, then the next, follows patterns that resemble neural networks, but on a scale no human instrument should be able to map. She describes it like this. Imagine standing on a shore and seeing the tide roll in. But this is not water. It is a tide of absence. It comes in waves that compress, vanish, and reappear, stretching and folding, skipping over certain zones, then engulfing them. Attempts to predict it, she says, must account not only for the propagation speed, but for adaptation. The silence changes based on what humans do to resist it. Shout, shout louder, blast radios, honk horns, all absorbed, all nullified. It seems almost playful in its cruelty, responding to attempts at communication as though testing, studying, learning. She's been tracking vibrations in buildings, vehicles, and objects, and notes irregular patterns. A faint tremor in metal structures, a subtle resonance in water, almost like the silence leaves traces of itself in the material world. The pulses are structured, repeating, like a language we cannot yet decode. It's communicating, she said, her voice low, tight. Not in words, not yet. But there's intelligence there, observation, anticipation. Callers confirm this. They report whispers on the border of perception, subtle hints of guidance or mockery. Some follow them, some flee. The acoustician warns that interpreting these faint signals is dangerous. They might be traps, or they might be the only clues left. She compares it to a predator studying its prey, learning their behavior, testing their instincts, then adjusting. We are not just in a silent world. We are observed in it. And the predator is adaptive, patient, calculating. We begin to map the zones together. She provides frequencies that survive longer at the edges, vibration patterns that could indicate safe passage. People call in with these observations, combining them in a network of shared survival strategies. Yet even as we coordinate, the silence spreads, swallowing the edges we thought were secure. Entire regions vanish before we can warn anyone. Streets become traps of invisible barriers. Cars stop mid-motion without a sound. Humans stumble into one another. Animals collide. Objects fall silently. The acoustician insists that understanding these patterns is critical. She theorizes that if we can map the progression and decipher its structure, we might predict the next wave, perhaps even manipulate our own behavior to survive it. But then she adds something worse. The silence seems to interact with sound itself, not just absorbing it, not just erasing it, but restructuring it. Frequencies, pitches, timbres, These disappear selectively. A human scream is swallowed instantly, but a faint, low vibration lingers, almost as if the silence allows it to pass briefly, then devours it again. The pattern is precise. She speculates that the silence is using sound as both bait and barrier, shaping the environment in ways we cannot yet comprehend. I ask about the edges. She describes a thin, shifting membrane that marks where sound disappears. It is not uniform. Sometimes it recoils at human attempts to cross. Sometimes it collapses unpredictably. The lines of the map she shares are like fractals, expanding, twisting, recursive, impossible to predict with absolute certainty. Yet within this chaos, she insists there is structure, intelligence, maybe even a plan. We discuss survival. She advises that humans must abandon reliance on sound for communication. Gestures, vibrations, observation. Eye contact where possible. Touch, movement. Frequencies that survive at the edges must be used sparingly, strategically. Panic is contagious. Silence magnifies it. Communities are breaking, not because of danger, but because humans cannot process a world without sound. Families, neighbors, entire towns become uncoordinated, lost in the void. And she warns, the silence might be evolving beyond comprehension. What we see, the waves, the absorption, the whispers, is only the first stage. If this intelligence is truly adaptive, it will learn faster than we can react. She mentions the possibility of structural vibrations not yet perceived, a level beneath our physical reality that humans have never sensed before. It could guide its expansion, target life specifically, anticipate strategies of resistance. Every faint tremor, every pulse in the metal, every irregular vibration is a clue, but also a warning. Callers from the dimming world share their observations. Houses trembling, faint hums beneath floors, irregular pulses in bridges, slight vibrations in rivers. Some follow these tremors to find safety. Some flee in terror. One survivor notes that animals behave differently around these vibrations, avoiding them or clustering unnaturally. Another reports that the vibrations seem to form patterns when multiple objects resonate together. It is as if the silence leaves breadcrumbs, hints of its presence, signaling awareness and anticipation of human action. The acoustician insists on documenting everything. Every report, every tremor, every survivor's account forms part of a living map. Not a map of space, but of a force, a predator, an intelligence we cannot yet see, but can track by its effect on our world. She warns me, the edge is not just a line, it's a living frontier. Every action you take, every sound you attempt, every attempt at survival, it observes and adapts. You must think, not shout. Move, not call. React, don't announce yourself. And even as we speak, even as I broadcast these warnings, the silence is advancing, swallowing the familiar, absorbing the audible, leaving only faint vibrations and the ghost of sound. Intelligence, purpose, structure. It is no longer simply absence. It is something alive, studying us, guiding, hunting. The last message she leaves me with, and I repeat it because it's all we have for survival. Watch the vibrations. Study the faintest patterns. Trust observation over hearing. The silence is learning. The silence adapts. The silence is patient. The wave of silence is no longer a distant threat. Reports confirm it advancing across continents, sweeping through cities, towns, and rural landscapes alike. Satellite data, barely functional, shows entire regions stripped of audio signals, the familiar pulse of civilization disappearing into black patches of nothing. It moves with a precision that is unnerving, a tide of absence rolling over terrain, folding around obstacles, skipping areas, then consuming them anyway. It is as though some intelligence is guiding it, calibrating its advance, learning from every sound we attempt to preserve. In towns already swallowed, streets lie frozen. Cars remain parked mid-turn, engines humming silently. Animals wander blindly, colliding into each other, walls, trees, as if the absence of sound disorients their perception. People are trapped, unable to coordinate, unable to hear instructions, unable to process what's happening. Those still on the periphery of the moving wall describe it as a physical force pressing against the world, like a tide pushing air, vibrating subtly through buildings, objects, the ground beneath them. The edge moves unpredictably in some places, advancing slowly, creeping through neighborhoods in a linear progression. In others, it leaps, engulfing entire blocks in seconds. Residents at the border report strange effects, faint vibrations in metal poles, low tremors through the earth, almost like whispers of warning. Some follow them, some ignore them. The acoustician notes that the pattern resembles neural feedback. The silence adapts to human attempts to avoid it, diverting, compressing, and even retreating momentarily if it encounters unexpected resistance, then returning stronger. Planes crossing the advancing wall fail without warning. Engines spin, propellers rotate, pilots scream inside cabins, but all sound is erased. Observers on the ground see the descent, but hear nothing. Entire military convoys report that attempts to use radios, sirens, or loudspeakers fail. Vehicles drive blindly, their operators relying on instinct and luck alone. Calls from surviving operators describe entire communications networks collapsing. The wall is indiscriminate, but also strangely selective. It seems to leave faint, audible remnants in some isolated pockets, perhaps as an experiment, perhaps to guide or mock. In cities partially engulfed, emergency systems struggle to function. Hospitals report alarms that ring only in visual lights, sirens that flash without noise. Streetlights flicker in sync with distant vibrations that no one can hear but can feel in the structure of the city. Pedestrians navigate by sight and touch, guided by intuition and trembling senses. Panic spreads faster than sound, creating chaos even in pockets where sound survives. Reports of the phenomenon's intelligence are increasing. One survivor describes a pattern in how the silence encroaches, like a hunter studying prey. Its advance slows in areas with high population density, as if evaluating movement, then speeds to engulf gaps. Another reports faint, irregular vibrations in a bridge's steel supports that coincide with attempts to flee. Every reaction seems anticipated. It is as if the silence itself is learning the behavior of those still able to perceive it, adjusting its expansion accordingly. Natural sounds behave differently. Rivers flow silently, leaves rustle in windless trees, animals breathe and move, but the audio that confirms existence is gone. Birds crash silently into buildings, insects collide mid-flight, and even footsteps vanish halfway to the ear. Callers report the sensation of the air itself thickening as the wave approaches, a tactile presence of absence. It is no longer enough to survive visually. Feeling, anticipation, intuition, and observation are the only tools left. Communication remains nearly impossible. Radios, phones, alarms, all swallowed. Some people report faint echoes that resist, tiny fragments of frequencies that persist for seconds before disappearing, almost like signals deliberately left behind. Others hear faint whispers on the fringe of perception, unintelligible, but structured. The acoustician believes these are the first signs of the intelligence behind the silence interacting with the world, testing, observing, and perhaps even trying to communicate or manipulate behavior. Highways become traps. Vehicles halted mid-motion, roads littered with panicked pedestrians and animals, and entire intersections silent but chaotic. The wall folds over itself, enveloping areas twice or three times as fast as expected, leaving survivors scrambling to edge zones where sound survives. Every movement becomes a calculation. One misstep could put you fully inside the advancing tide, where voice, engines, and life's audible confirmation vanish forever. Observers from multiple continents report the same phenomena. Europe, Asia, North America. Waves of silence consuming cities, forests, industrial areas. Local media feeds fail. Entire networks collapse as sound is devoured. In zones already consumed, people are effectively frozen in a world stripped of one of its most fundamental truths. The acoustician notes that while the phenomenon respects physical barriers, buildings, hills, rivers, its adaptive nature allows it to bypass obstacles, fold around structures, and resume engulfing the world with terrifying efficiency. The subtle vibrations, the faint remnants, the irregular pulses, these are all the only clues left to navigate the advancing wall. Humans at the edge report clusters of structures that produce discernible vibrations when touched, like faint signals embedded in the material of the world. Following them becomes the difference between survival and annihilation. The wall adapts in real time, and every sound we rely upon for orientation is a potential threat. It is no longer hypothetical. The wave of silence moves across the globe, intelligent, methodical, adaptive, consuming life's confirmation. Observers, survivors, and the acoustician all agree on one truth. This is not merely absence. It is a living, learning force. And we are running out of time to understand its patterns before the next wave swallows everything still able to hear. Breaking news reaches the broadcast. The acoustician has made a discovery. While mapping the spread of silence, she has detected patterns, hidden structures beneath the void, subtle vibrations not in the air, but within the very fabric of objects and surfaces. The silence is not merely absence. It is layered, structured, and it interacts with the material world in ways that defy conventional physics. Buildings, bridges, metals, even water carry faint oscillations, almost imperceptible tremors that seem to ripple with purpose. Survivors report noticing these vibrations before sound disappears entirely. A woman describes a low, almost rhythmic pulse through her apartment floor, which she followed to navigate corridors as the silence advanced. A man trapped in a subway tunnel sensed vibrations in the rails and walls, using them to avoid collisions with others. The acoustician insists that these tremors are not random. They carry patterns, repetition, and structure, proof that the silence has intelligence, that it might be communicating or guiding behavior in ways we cannot yet decode. The edge of the silent zones now reveals more than disappearance. It hints at underlying order. Where sound dies, faint tremors persist, almost as if the world itself is whispering clues to those who can feel rather than hear. Satellites cannot detect this. Standard sensors fail. Only human perception, coupled with careful observation, reveals the patterns. Vibrations in metal poles, water pipes, and wooden beams form subtle grids, lines, and waves, shifting in response to human movement and attempts at communication. The acoustician calls it a substrate beneath reality, a plane where the force behind the silence exerts influence unseen but tangible. Callers corroborate the phenomenon. A man stranded on a highway reports that a faint pulse through his car's frame guided him away from a collapsing overpass, even as his own horns and engine sounds vanished. Another survivor speaks of vibrations through a bridge's steel beams that seemed almost deliberate, a map of safe passage. People are learning to rely on these cues, tracking and interpreting them as navigation tools. Yet the intelligence behind them remains elusive, adaptive, and potentially hostile. The acoustician theorizes that the silence is probing, experimenting, learning. The patterns in vibrations correspond to attempts at communication. Every shout, alarm, and radio transmission affects the tremors. The phenomenon reacts, adapts, and potentially manipulates survival outcomes. This is not passive absence. It is active engagement with the physical world and those still able to perceive it. Humans are being studied, their actions mapped through the substrate beneath reality. Reports grow more alarming. Animals are reacting to these hidden vibrations in ways that defy expectation. Herds of deer cluster along the lines of subtle tremors. Birds adjust flight paths in mid-air without audible cues. Pets move as if guided by an invisible force. Survivors begin to notice that following the vibrations sometimes leads to safety, sometimes to danger, implying a level of intelligence orchestrating the patterns. Some faintly hear whispers at the edge of perception, a sort of shadow language encoded in vibrations rather than air. The acoustician warns that these signals could be a double-edged sword. They can guide, but they can also deceive. Trust your instincts, she advises. The patterns are alive. They are not neutral. They observe, react, and may manipulate. Her work suggests that the silence is a predator, hunting through absence, exploiting the dependency of humans on sound while leaving traces in another, hidden layer of reality. Civilization continues to collapse in audible zones. Cities once filled with the hum of life are now eerily still. Emergency services fail. Vehicles stall silently. Fires rage without the roar of flame. The only markers of survival are these faint, structured vibrations beneath the perceptible world. They are maps and warnings, guides and tests, all at once. The intelligence behind them remains unknown. Some survivors have begun documenting the vibrations systematically. They touch metal poles, feel the rhythm in bridges, note water's pulse, and use these subtle signals to navigate toward safety. The acoustician interprets these findings, suggesting that humans may be able to communicate through these vibrations themselves, creating a fragile network independent of the audible world. It is dangerous, experimental, but potentially the only lifeline left. The silent tide continues to advance, swallowing cities, rural towns, forests, and coastlines. Planes plummet silently. Streets are filled with panicking animals and humans moving blindly. Yet beneath this apparent chaos, subtle patterns persist, forming a hidden structure beneath reality, guiding those who are attentive, observing, and cautious. The discovery of vibrations beneath reality changes the stakes. The silence is not just absence, it is a force, intelligent and adaptive, hunting and studying humanity. What we once relied on, our voices, the world's audible feedback, is gone. Survival now depends on perceiving the imperceptible, interpreting the hidden tremors that trace its path, and understanding that the silence itself is 𝒂𝒐𝒊𝒏𝒔𝒎𝒊𝒐𝒏, aware and patient. Attempts to communicate are failing. Every horn, every shout, every radio transmission is absorbed before reaching another ear. People are discovering the cruel adaptability of the silence. It doesn't merely erase sound, it studies it. Frequencies are swallowed selectively. Alarms, sirens, and emergency broadcasts vanish, yet faint vibrations sometimes linger, hinting at intention. The silence reacts to human behavior, adjusting its progression, adapting its strategies. It is no longer passive. It is learning. Survivors report that shouting into the void does nothing. One family tried to call across a street. Their voices died mid-phrase, their words evaporating into nothing. A driver honked repeatedly to warn oncoming traffic, but the other car remained unaware, moving blindly into danger. The silence seems to anticipate human attempts at coordination and resistance, compressing itself around effort, neutralizing sound, leaving only uncertainty. Callers describe strange phenomena at the edges of perception. Some hear whispers just beyond comprehension, faint rhythmic pulses or subtle vibrations in the ground, walls, and metal structures. The acoustician confirms the silence adapts, responding to sound with structural feedback, generating patterns humans can interpret only if they are attuned to the hidden vibrations beneath reality. These are not random anomalies. They are responses to human action, evidence of intelligence and learning. In towns partially swallowed, entire populations are disoriented. Streets filled with panicked pedestrians collide, vehicles stall silently, animals wander in confusion. Attempts to coordinate rescue or warn neighbors fail. Sound, once the primary tool for organizing, is now a liability. Communities fracture, not because of fear alone, but because the absence of sound prevents communication, feedback, and cohesion. The silence exploits this, feeding on confusion, observation, and instinct. Some survivors attempt to innovate. They tap, knock, or create vibrations through floors, walls, and metal objects. These signals sometimes persist longer, and others report faint traces of understanding through them, as if communicating across a hidden plane. The acoustician suggests that humans may be able to bypass the audible world entirely, using the substrate of vibrations beneath reality to coordinate, to warn, to survive. It is fragile, dangerous, and experimental, but the only way to counter a force that learns faster than we can speak. Planes crash silently. Bridges shudder without sound. Fires rage unseen and unheard. Streets are filled with panicked animals and humans moving blindly, collisions invisible to the ear, but catastrophic in reality. Yet amidst this chaos, subtle, structured vibrations appear to persist. Observers begin to sense patterns, clusters of pulses forming maps, signals guiding survival, traces left intentionally. The silence studies these reactions, adapts them, and reshapes its strategies in real time. The acoustician warns, the longer the silence evolves, the more intelligent it becomes. It observes, reacts, anticipates. Humans relying on audible cues are increasingly at risk. She suggests strict attention to vibrations, light patterns, and subtle environmental changes. Trust the imperceptible, not the audible. The silence is no longer just a void. It is a learning predator, hunting not with teeth, but with absence. Survivors report varying experiences. Some detect faint tremors guiding them away from danger. Others find deceptive patterns leading to dead ends. Every action is analyzed by silence. Every attempt to transmit sound triggers adaptation. One group of hikers described a small valley that resisted the encroaching void for a few minutes, then collapsed faster than expected after their attempts to signal for help. The silence had been observed, measured, and adjusted. Animals, too, respond differently in different zones. Herds avoid certain tremors, cluster along others, as if guided by hidden intelligence. Pets, once companions, now behave unpredictably, reacting to vibrations humans cannot fully perceive. Humans begin to learn from animals' instincts, interpreting behavior in the absence of sound as a guide to safe movement. Cities are transformed into landscapes of tension. Streets are chaotic, movement unpredictable. Human coordination relies entirely on observation, intuition, and subtle environmental feedback. The silence learns from every attempt at resistance, turning normal behavior into risk. Every action carries consequences, as the void studies, records, and manipulates outcomes. The survivor's network, fragile as it is, begins to rely more on structured vibrations. Tapping sequences, rhythmic knocks, and subtle pulses form rudimentary communication systems. These attempts are experimental, their success partial at best, but they represent humanity's first adaptation to a world where sound itself is a weapon wielded by an intelligent void. The silence is patient, adaptive, relentless. Its learning curve is exponential, faster than any human mind can track. It does not merely erase. It observes, absorbs, anticipates, and exploits. Survival depends now not on what can be heard, but on what can be interpreted, anticipated, and acted upon without audible confirmation. The world is almost entirely silent. Entire cities, forests, and towns have vanished into the void of sound. Streets lie frozen with abandoned vehicles. Panicked humans stumble blindly. Animals collide in confusion. Even in places where sound remains, it is fragile, fleeting, and deceptive. Only the faintest frequencies persist, scattered like remnants of a civilization struggling to survive against a force that devours communication itself. Callers describe chasing these final audible threads, the last frequencies, clinging to them as lifelines. A woman stranded in a high-rise notes the hum of a generator that survives for a few seconds before the silence absorbs it completely. A man reports hearing faint taps in metal piping beneath his feet, which guide him across a collapsed bridge. Even the tiniest, most irregular vibrations become crucial, hints at safety, warnings of danger, fragile maps etched into the structure of reality. The acoustician studies these surviving frequencies, mapping their persistence, decay, and the patterns the silence leaves behind. She calls them breadcrumbs, traces of audio and vibration that can be followed, but only with careful observation. Misinterpretation can lead to disaster. One group of survivors mistook a faint, recurring vibration for a safe path, only to find it led them directly into a collapsed building where the silence had already swallowed all sound. The intelligence behind the phenomenon is relentless, adaptive, almost playful in its cruelty. Communication is no longer verbal. Survivors use tapping, knocking, and other vibrations to convey instructions. Patterns emerge, simple at first. Sequences to indicate direction, warnings of danger, presence of life. Those who can interpret these signals move with greater efficiency, avoiding hazards invisible to those relying on vanished sound. The acoustician warns that the silence adapts to these methods as well, gradually erasing the frequencies they rely on, forcing constant innovation. Survival becomes a game of perception, adaptation, and intuition. The faintest audible sounds are precious. A dripping faucet, a vibrating wire, a subtle mechanical hum. They are guided through a landscape that has lost its natural audio cues. Entire groups depend on these fragile threads, following them through streets littered with collapsed structures, vehicles frozen mid-crash, and panicked animals moving without sound. Each step requires observation, careful attention to subtle vibrations, and avoidance of human error. Planes still fall silently. Bridges shudder without audible warning. Fires rage without noise. Entire neighborhoods collapse into invisible traps. Yet within these zones, the final frequencies, those irregular, faint vibrations, persist long enough to provide navigation, strategy, and sometimes survival. Humans cling to them desperately, learning to read their patterns, discern their reliability, and avoid traps set by an intelligent void. Some survivors report whispers barely perceptible through residual vibrations. Not voices, not words, but rhythmic oscillations hinting at intent. Some follow these patterns, finding temporary refuge. Others misinterpret them, leading to accidents. The acoustician suggests that the whispers are experiments of silence, tests, manipulations, perhaps guidance, or perhaps mockery. The intelligence behind the void is learning as fast as humans adapt. Every interaction changes the structure of the silent world. Animals also react to these final frequencies. Herds of deer, flocks of birds, even domestic pets move along the subtle vibrations, sometimes guiding humans, sometimes adding confusion. Observation of animal behavior becomes a crucial survival tool, as instinct responds to signals that humans cannot perceive fully. The interplay between faint frequencies, human perception, and animal reaction creates a tenuous framework of survival amidst total auditory collapse. Networks of survivors begin using the frequencies deliberately. Tapping codes, rhythmic sequences, and vibration-based messages form rudimentary communication channels. These methods are fragile and require constant vigilance. The silence adapts, slowly erasing even these lifelines. The human struggle against an intelligent, adaptive force is reaching a critical point. Survival depends on observation, intuition, and careful interpretation of every trace left behind. The acoustician warns, time is running out. The final frequencies are dwindling, their persistence shortening with each wave of the advancing void. What remains is no longer abundant. Humans must act quickly, move carefully, and interpret the patterns of vibrations before the silence adapts fully, leaving no threads to follow. The intelligence behind the phenomenon has studied, learned, and adjusted to every attempt at survival. Humanity's edge is razor thin. As the wave advances, the final frequencies are all that connect life to orientation, communication, and survival. They are fragile, fleeting, and deceptive, but they are the last hope. Humans who can perceive them, interpret them, and act upon them gain a fleeting advantage. Those who fail are swallowed, unnoticed, in total absence. Every pulse, every faint vibration, every whisper through materials is both a clue and a test. Humanity must navigate this shrinking network of survivable space, or vanish quietly into the void. The final frequencies are fading. Cities, towns, forests, everything once alive with sound is gone. Streets are silent tombs, vehicles frozen mid-crash, animals frozen in unnatural positions, eyes wide, movements suspended in soundless horror. The faintest vibrations remain, scattered and irregular, the last fragile lifelines for those still clinging to existence. Every heartbeat, every breath, every whisper that once defined reality is swallowed in the void. Callers are fewer now. Those who survived the advancing silence are huddled in basements, attics, tunnels, or isolated clearings where faint vibrations persist. Their voices are fractured, distorted, barely escaping the edge of perception, yet they cling desperately to whatever traces of communication remain. One young man reports following subtle tremors through a collapsed overpass, only to find that the vibrations abruptly vanish, leaving him in total void. Another describes crawling through a forest guided only by the rhythmic pulse in a tree's trunk, arriving at a clearing where even the birds are gone, their absence deafening. The acoustician has stopped answering. Her last message was fragmented, transmitted through faint, irregular pulses that barely reached the broadcast. The substrate beneath reality adapts faster than prediction. Trust only vibrations. After that, only static, interrupted by occasional tremors in metal, wood, and water. It is as if the silence has learned to erase not just sound, but communication itself. Her work, humanity's last map of understanding, is now trapped in imperceptible tremors, vanishing as quickly as it is discovered. Planes continue to fall silently. Bridges shudder under their own weight. Fires burn without sound. Streets are littered with humans and animals, moving blindly, colliding, tumbling. Observation becomes the only tool of survival. Even perception is tested. The faint vibrations beneath reality, once hints of guidance, now pulse unpredictably. Sometimes they lead to safety. Sometimes they lead to collapse. It is impossible to know. The silence is no longer just a void. It is aware, patient, and hunting. A caller describes stepping through the edge one last time. His hands brush against a metal railing, feeling tremors that seem almost deliberate, pulsing with rhythm and intent. He follows them, thinking they will guide him to a safe zone. Instead, the vibrations shift suddenly, retreating, and he finds himself in the center of a collapsed square, alone, deaf, with animals frozen mid-motion. The world paused in absolute horror. He screams, but his voice dies before leaving his mouth. The silence swallows even intention. The intelligence behind the void is revealed in fragments. Observers note faintly structured vibrations aligning with human movement, guiding, misguiding, testing. It studies instinct, adapts, learns, and reshapes the environment to erase predictability. Humans are prey in a world where the most basic confirmation of existence, sound, has become a weapon against them. Life continues visually, mechanically, instinctively, but without audible cues, without reassurance, without feedback. Panic becomes physical, unavoidable. As the last signals of sound vanish, the broadcast itself becomes irregular, breaking in and out as the void approaches. The faintest tremors in the studio walls, the vibration of the chair beneath, the pulsing hum of power lines, these are all that remain. Every attempt to transmit voice, every click of a key, every movement is absorbed, restructured, leaving only empty waves. The silence studies every act, every hesitation, every reaction, refining itself. There is no escape, only observation, anticipation, and the faintest traces of vibration. And then, the final moment. The tremors stop. The vibrations, once faint but perceptible, vanish. Every last thread of sound disappears. Streets, skies, forests, homes, all swallowed into total absence. Not just silence, but nothingness masquerading as silence. Eyes can see, hands can touch, but nothing responds. No echo, no voice, no hint. The intelligence behind the void has closed in completely, leaving the last human observers suspended in an imperceptible, eternal, soundless nightmare. Yet even in this ultimate absence, a trace remains. A faint vibration, almost imperceptible, almost mocking, running through the remnants of metal and water. Not enough to guide, not enough to comfort, but enough to remind me of what once existed. A predator's signature, etched into the world, waiting for any motion, any life, any sound to stir again. Humanity survives only in fragments, motion without sound, sight without echo, instinct without confirmation. The world is a graveyard of sound, alive only in its absence. And somewhere, in the empty vibrations beneath reality, the intelligence waits, patient, adaptive, eternal. The last signal radio cuts off. Nothing follows. The silence remains. The void has won.